London does provide a lot of opportunities because we have so many clubs here. We have, and a lot of subcultures. I guess you haven't maybe seen it as much over the past 10 years. But again, that could also be part of the kind of accessibility thing where, grime, garage, jungle, dubstep, all these genres came out of very working class cultures. People who really had to make something for themselves.
If you're outside the big kind of urban centres, living in kind of small towns or somewhere doesn't have quite as big a scene, you're very much at a kind of disadvantage. Tied to that, I feel like the music scene in the UK in general is very much skewed towards London. I mean, all four of us live in London, for example. Is the idea that the scene is skewed towards London an issue, or is that just kind of, something that's going to happen, in such like an urbanised phenomenon like dance music?
I mean, we've all moved to London for a reason, right? Like...
Yeah, I'm from here.
Yeah. Sorry, we're all but Dwayne. Sorry, you're lucky. You got it. I think there's a huge issue with the saturation of London. I also have massively benefited from it. I left Hull because I was not getting anywhere in life generally there. So I wanted to be in a place where I felt a lot more comfortable and I could be myself and, thrive and all of that sort of stuff. The DJing and the music side of things was always a side project for me. Again, working class, I was working in a full-time job up until a year and a half ago. So it just so happened that London enabled me to sort of concentrate on the music side of things and build it over here. But I think it all just comes down to the fact that the Tories are obviously fucking awful cunts and they're funding all this money into everything. There's a lot that we can all talk about as individuals. There's this very, very small pocket of underground music culture and say we're going to try and do things better. But if it comes down to the funding, the councils, who's elected, where is the money going? It's absolutely not going to the north. Yeah,
I mean, I was quite lucky that I grew up in London. But I guess the difference is I kind of came from, so my mum kind of had me at 19, was a single mum, council flat, in one of the worst boroughs in the UK. By any kind of statistic, you're not really supposed to make it in kind of my situation, but I was quite lucky that I found something I liked. I got into, and I do find that London definitely gave me a lot of opportunities, and it's quite interesting when I talk to my friends because even the way they got into dance music or got into stuff, they would have got into it in a very different way. Whereas I guess I was quite lucky that I got to get into the good stuff from quite young just because I grew up in East London and grime was around me. So it kind of made things easier in that sense. But I guess the harder thing about living in London is the fact that you do have to kind of grind a little bit harder. I quite like it personally, just because I can just be quite lazy basically. And it kind of makes me continue to work hard. But, I also had a part-time job for about 8 years until about a year ago. Only when I got to a point where I was like, okay, I've got enough savings. This is kind of going well enough that I could probably live off it and just see how it goes. But even then it's I guess if you're living in somewhere if you're in Manchester, Bristol, there's luckily enough of a music scene that you're fine. I guess if you get into this, if you're young and you get into this music outside of London, it's going to be harder. Whereas if you kind of build the career and then eventually move out, it's probably fine because, I've got friends who've moved to Devon and other places who still do music full time and it's fine because it's they have enough of a career that they can kind of afford to not live in the bubble, but also still have a sustainable career and continue to tour. But I mean, yeah, it's London does provide a lot of opportunities because we have so many clubs here. We have, and a lot of subcultures. I guess you haven't maybe seen it as much over the past 10 years. But again, that could also be part of the kind of accessibility thing where, grime, garage, jungle, dubstep, all these genres came out of very working class cultures. People who really had to make something for themselves and, kind of worked hard for it. Whereas I guess maybe because they say it's a bit maybe just because times have changed, music genres haven't evolved in the same way. It doesn't maybe feel as though you're getting those same levels of birth as you kind of once did out of working class subcultures, which would be quite hard to it's quite interesting to think, well, why hasn't that happened again in the past 10, 15 years, basically?
Honestly, I've been asking myself the same question, and recently I went to Berlin and I hadn't been there since before the pandemic. Well, I had been there, but just in and out 24 hours, I spent a a week there, and it made me realize how corporate London has become. Even even Pussy Palace is complicit in it. Do you know what I mean? Like it's scaled up, and it's not, as much as it pains me to say, it's not an underground club anymore. You know, it's like a first point of contact for a lot of like people just coming into their queerness. So. There isn't any like DIY. Like me and my friend were talking about it a couple of weeks ago as well. It's just like there used to be heavy DIY, heavy like subculture building, and in the last like 10 years I've not really seen it. And anything that has been a little inkling of, then it is, people get burnt out and they can't do it anymore because it's too difficult to do it in London because it's become so gentrified, it's become so corporate. But to answer your question, like yes, like it is, obviously there's more opportunity like in London, and like you said, like the other cities are not being supported or like funded enough, especially when it comes to like creativity and the arts. But I worry quite a bit, because right now we've not even seen like the full effect of what the cost of living in it. We're still at the beginning of it really, and starting to see, you know, some people haven't felt it fully yet. Do you know what I mean? Apart from like prices, like food prices and stuff like that raising up. But like I think it's going to get like, maybe unless something drastically changes now, which we know it's not going to, like, sorry to be down about that, but like we're going to see the full, I think in 3 years time it's like it's going to really hit hard. We're already seeing so many people moving out of London. Yeah, people who can afford a career, but especially now, if you want to make it in the music industry in any sort of in any avenue, it does pay to be in a city like London. But then how can you like live here? Because it's not just about, okay, yeah, I can live maybe in Essex or something, like and like traveling, because now it's not just about, it was always about networking in the creative industry. You always had to be the right person in the right place, right? But now it's about marketing, you know. So how do you navigate those two things while also being in a cost of living, while also like traveling further and further out? Even I've thought about like, oh, am I going to move back to Glasgow? But then it's just too white for me. It's there, like here, like I'm, you know, one of many. In Glasgow, it's not. It's still so small, even though there's so much amazing music stuff happening there. But even the people that I know, especially like DJs and stuff like that are from Glasgow, they're even like, oh, okay, my friend Sarah Wild, anyone who knows them, amazing DJ, producer, check them out, is they've just moved to London. They didn't want to, but it's just like, well, I'm getting booked here all the time. It's getting too expensive to move. So they've moved to Lewisham, and like, it's just, yeah, so I worry about the impact of that. Back to the first question about it becoming more homogenised, like this little progress that we've seen over the last 10 years, I worry what the cost of living will do. What's it going to look like? In fact, we've already regressed. Like, we think like things were getting positive, but you know, we've regressed in so many ways to the fact that, like, you know, I'm just going to say something silly here, but the fact that like people are openly talking about like Ozempic and skinny is in, you know, like we've regressed like so much, like, and I think that regression, unfortunately, sorry guys, it might get worse. That's what I fear. So, yeah, I'm scared. That's the truth.
I mean, the networking point you made is actually quite a good one as well, because especially being in London, it does help. And even through my music jobs, I think this kind of maybe happens a bit less, but especially like 20, 30 years ago, and even like 15 years ago, you kind of just got a music job if you just hung around long enough. And people would just be like, your kind of hair, we'll just give you a job. Like, honestly, I got my job at Black Market because I got my job at Black Market because you just go in there all the time. And then I was like, yo, can I work some work experience? And they were like, cool. And I just never left. Like, I got my job at Temper because I used to just go to Forward every single week. And they were like, he's into the music. Like, we'll get him on board, you know? And just even through kind of, you know, through Black Market, and then got my job at Cargo. It was just because I was just like about. I was just always about. I was always willing. I was always kind of around. And I guess when you are in a city, like, it's just so much easier, because when you send a CV and you're living far out, like Manchester or Doncaster or just anywhere, like, you can't be in the room to even get a music job. Whereas if you're in London or Bristol, I guess there is enough going on that when people create things or people happen, you're just like a familiar face enough to be like, man, you're just here. We might as well just pay you at some point.
Hard relate to that.